Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. To All right, so when we do this, we're going to be looking at a couple different things. First, we're going to be looking at layout and scale or proportion. Second, we're going to be looking at creating construction lines. We're going to be talking a little bit about line technique. And then we're going to sketch our shape according to the layout and the proportion. So we're going to sketch our shape. And then we're going to look at tonal shading. And we're going to learn how to do something called a gradient. So let's get started. First of all, the type of sketch that we're going to produce is going to be a sketch that is sort of realistic, but we're not going to focus on perspective very much. We're going to try to make it look as realistic as possible, but we're going to ignore some of the curves. Like, for example, when you hold this out at an angle like this, you might see some curvature on the bottom. If I were drawing this from this side, I would make this perfectly straight and ignore any perspective that would make it look closer or further away. We're going to draw it approximately actual size since it fits nicely on the paper. That'll help us with proportion. When I talk about proportion, I'm talking about the size of the object as it appears on paper as it is relative to the real world. So in this case, I'm going to draw it actual size on paper. So it should be pretty easy. So the proportion or scale will be 1:1, the actual size. When we look at the object, we're going to take a look at the fact that its length in width. So you got about 2 widths long. So it's about twice as long as it is wide. So our final product will be about twice as long as it is wide. Other things we can look at here, we see that the buttons are, of course, on the front half, but they're a little forward of the center. So they don't come all the way back to the center. This little HP logo, which I didn't include in my original prototype sketch, is also just forward of center. So our center line is approximately right here. And we've got the buttons split down the middle, the wheel right on center line, and then the cord right on center line. Let's set that aside, and we're going to take into consideration those things. So construction lines. So that was talking about the layout and proportion. Right? So now we're going to take a look at construction lines. Construction lines are lightly drawn lines that we use to help guide us. Now, if you're working on a sheet of graph paper or a notebook, a lined notebook paper or something like that, that's really helpful because it already comes with those lines. But you don't need those. We can just sketch our own in. I'm going to start by sketching in the center line or a center line. And my center line is going to be exactly what the name implies. It's going to be a line that goes down the center of the object. So my object will be symmetrical top to bottom. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish the length of the object. So objects are about that long. So I'm going to sketch in. So we come in here and I'm actually going to draw the box. And as you can see right now, it's very faint. I'm not focusing on these being dark. If your lines are dark and very easy to see at this stage. That's not good. At no point in this project or this demonstration are we going to push hard enough on the paper to dent it. You should be able to swipe your fingers across it at any time, and it should be just as smooth as a new sheet of paper. We're not going to push hard like you would when you're writing. We're going to be very gentle throughout this activity. So I've now established the length. I'm looking at the width, and I'm realizing that I made the upper portion a little wider than the bottom portion, so I'm just going to ignore my first line here. I'm not going to erase or anything. It's so light it doesn't matter. You barely see it. So now I have an even proportion side to side. I'll check that on my real mouse just for the sake of just using my fingers as a measuring tool. Just measure close enough. So I got the length and the width, and it's about 2 widths long. So the width is half of the length, or the length is twice the width. Now, one thing we haven't addressed, so those are construction lines. I haven't addressed something called line technique, or the line technique that I'm using. Now, the way I'm sketching with my pencil has a couple different names. One of the names that it's been called is overlapping line segments. So when you see me move my pencil, I'm putting the pencil down on the paper, dragging it forward, lifting it up, putting it back, maybe halfway from where I started before, and repeating that process. If I were to exaggerate the process, it would look like this. So this is a very exaggerated process. So I'm going to draw a short line, then I'm going to draw another short line, draw a short line, and they kind of look like feathers if I were to actually zoom in real close on it. Whenever you do this practice, your goal is to make a straight line, so they should overlap and become one line. But on a microscopic level, it would, if I got a magnifying glass or microscope and zoomed in real close, it would look kind of like that. So I'm dragging the pencil across very lightly, and then repeating and working my way across to get to where I want to go. I've got to, I want to go from this point to this point. I can do so by first starting on the point. I've got the first point 1, go point 2, and I'm going to look at point 2 and concentrate on point 2 the whole time and get me a straight line. That's the line technique I'm using. I've got the general shape laid out, or general size and proportion laid out. We've got it split top to bottom. I like to split it front to back. So I'm going to split the grid in half approximately, left to right. So just guesstimate the middle, close enough. And now we're ready to start thinking about putting the details of the mouse in place. So first, let's go ahead and draw the curvature of the outline. So I take a look at this, and I've got a little bit, we'll say pointy, right? Kind of egg shaped on this end. It's not just a circle. It's elliptical. It comes in, and the curvature changes as it goes. So we're going to come in. And I got to draw some points to go through. And here I am. And start sketching, and I'll do one side at a time. All right. And then we'll repeat the same thing other side. So I can plot points if I need some guidance. So I can estimate using my pencil. Say, oh, that'll work right about there. This is coming up about here. So I'm going to come in and now let's go ahead and sketch. And notice that I'm not drawing real heavy. It's nice and light, overlapping line segment technique with the pencil. Try to get a smooth curve, and that produces the curvature that I'm looking for. because I created this grid, because I created the grid, it's relatively easy to make the two sides pretty close to symmetrical. If I were to fold this, it probably wouldn't be perfect, but it's pretty good for what we're looking for. Now we're going to take a look at the front end. The front end, it has a steeper curve to it, much more circular, and it's slightly flattened in the front, but very rounded here. So we'll have a slightly flat section up here. It's going to be pretty rounded there. The curvature stops at about a quarter of the way back from the front to back. So a little bit forward of this center. So we're going to come in here and I'm going to very lightly draw a line vertically so that I can create that curve. And this is going to taper in just slightly here. And then this is going to be a pretty steep curve here because I wanted it pretty flat across the front. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that process on this other side. So you can see the line crosses right about there. So we're going to come in about the same spot and then get a pretty circular curve. And notice I'm moving my pencil right now and I'm not touching the paper. So I'm kind of practicing with my mind and hand to get the shape that I'm looking for. Now, once I have got the pencil going in a direction that I like, I'm comfortable with, then I'll start putting it on the paper. And that was a little bit shallow of a turn. I want a bigger, more round turn, so I'm going to make that a little bit rounder. I'll rotate the paper, make it easier for me to get my hand in a comfortable position for that turn. Don't be afraid to turn your paper many times to get the angle that you're looking for. All right, so there's my outline. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty close. Matter of fact, that was all freehand. We don't want to trace because remember, we're practicing for developing things that we would design ourselves. So, tracing is great if you're copying something that already exists, but if you're trying to create something new, it's not a great idea to trace. It's impossible to trace. There's nothing to trace. So we're creating something new. All right, now the next thing is I'm looking at these buttons. I want to differentiate and create this line for the buttons. And remember we said it's just a little bit forward of half. So if we were to go half, split that in half, that the center of the front half is the back of the mouse wheel. So that's a good starting point. There's something easy for us to do. So we come in here and here's front to back. We'll split it in half. And that means and we said the mouse wheel is starting at the center of the front. So I'm going to come in and sketch that mouse wheel, which will be just an oval. And I can use my central symmetry line as a guideline so I can see how close or far I am away for guessing that size. Okay. Now around the outside of that oval for the wheel is another oval, in my case, that is a little longer on the back side than the front. So draw another oval, a little bit longer on the back side. Then on the front, skinny on the sides. All right. So there's my oval. There's my wheel. That's the second oval was the little detent here. Now I'm going to leave this line along. Tripping over my tongue here. We're going to leave this line alone. It's already here. We need to figure out how to draw this curvature. So let's figure out where it is. Again, center line. This was about half, so we're about a third of the way from the center to here. Back. This was my center mark. I'll go back about a third. And that's where this is. I come in and produce, and then I'm going to split. I'm also, just to make it easier, since this is a complex curve, I'm going to throw another grid this way so that I have even on both sides. You notice that the ferrule of my pencil is about that width, so that's a good measurement trick. If you've got your pretty fancy candy cane stripe pencil or some other pencil with a cool design, you can that provide some nice use for quick scale measurements. I can count my stripes or count your kitty cats or whatever whatever you happen to be picking up. So I'm going to come in here, take a look. Now I got to figure out, where does it end? Is this end at the same point as the wheel? Does it end at the same point as the divot, or is it somewhere in between? And if I look at it, it's right about where the wheel is. So that means this curve is going to go down to about where the wheel is, where about this previous line. And I'll repeat the process on the other side. So there you go. Just created a computer mouse. Got the outline. Let's throw that chord on there. Darken the center line. Now I have the basic outline of my mouse. So we just went over layout, construction lines, line technique. We just sketched out the basic outline. And now the last thing we're going to do is work on the gradient with our tonal shading. This is the part that steps us up to have us go from an outline to something that is quite realistic. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, first I'm going to start with the darkest parts. When you look at this, you'll notice that we have shiny parts. This is a black mouse. You think to yourself, initially you think to yourself, how in the world am I going to draw that? Let me throw my little HP logo in there just because. There you go, close enough. I've got this shiny, but it does shine. So as the light shines on it, this part right here is closest to the light. So it's lighter, it's less dark than the places that are away from the light. The same is true in the gray. Of course, there's a gap here, so that's very, very dark because the light just seems to suck right in there. Same with the gap along there. So let's go ahead, let's start with our darkest parts first. It's always easy to make something darker. It's very difficult to make something lighter. So I like to start with the darkest parts, and I can make those parts good and dark. And this gap is just around the wheel. It's not all the way. I'm not going to shade this entire oval in because that's a divot in the mouse buttons. It's not a hole. The dark spot is the gap around between the buttons and the wheel. Widen that out a little bit. Account for that dip. And then we're going to go around the perimeter, and that's where the darkest spot was. It's the lowest. It's the farthest away. And we're going to darken the perimeter. I'm going to be very gentle with my pencil. I'm not going to put a lot of weight on the pencil at this point. Focusing on the black section first, since the black section is obviously the darkest section. Since the color black is the darkest color we have, it's the absence of light. Absorbs the majority of the color spectrum. We're going to do the same thing up front here, but I just won't push as hard on my pencil. Even lighter. Maybe if it's a wooden pencil, you can come in and put it on its side. That's really great way to do it because you get a nice wide section. And then I'm going to repeat this process all around the edges as I start working towards the center where the highlights were, at a highlight section right about here where I don't want to put any color. Highlight section here, we're going to have like minimal color. So come in, again, hit those dark spots. Make sure they're good and dark. I'm not producing any hard lines at this point since I'm trying to add some tonality to it. Lines are a thing we draw on paper. They're not a real world thing. So they're really helpful in modeling, but remember, they are imaginary. So if you're producing something that you're trying to sketch and make it look realistic, edges are where we get the realism, not lines. So that it's that contrast from where you drew and where you didn't draw. The last thing we're going to do is I'm going to take my finger and try to blend this. I want to be careful not to blend too much so that it all winds up becoming the same color. I want to make sure they have a bright spot and a dark spot. I can use my eraser to brighten up the bright spots. And we can go back and add more darkness to the dark spots if we want to make it look more realistic. There's that chord section. And there you have it. That's how to go from nothing to something with some tonal shading and some realistic concept sketching. So remember, it's the shading that steps you from a simple line drawing to a more realistic looking model. Have fun and go be awesome.